Clouds invited me, and mist summoned me, and the course of the stars, and the lightning's speed hastened me, and the winds in the vision caused me to fly, and lifted me upward, and bore me into heaven. And I went in till I drew nigh to a wall, which is built of crystals and surrounded by tongues of fire, and drew nigh to a large house, which was built of crystals. And the walls of the house were like a tessellated floor made of crystals, and its groundwork was of crystal. Its ceiling was like the path of the stars and the lightnings, and between them were fiery cherubim, and their heaven was as clear as water. A flaming fire surrounded the walls, and its portals blazed with fire. And I entered into that house, and it was hot as fire and cold as ice. There were no delights of life therein. Fear covered me, and trembling got hold upon me. There was a second house, greater than the former, and the entire portal stood open before me, and it was built of flames of fire. And in every respect it was so excellent in splendor and magnificence and extent that I cannot describe it to you.
What you've just heard and seen isn't plucked from the pages of a science fiction novel with a slightly repetitive vocabulary. This strange description has far deeper roots and holds a profound mystery. It hails from an age long past, so ancient that its futuristic depictions seem simply inconceivable, from an era preceding the Great Flood. But hold on a moment, isn't that an alien abduction being described? How could such a story date back thousands of years? Follow along as we dissect this ancient script, seeking clues to its mysterious origins and meanings. Before we delve into this mysterious text in detail, let's first take a brief look at what kind of text it is, who wrote it, and when. The lines you've just heard are a part of the Ethiopian Book of Enoch, which is estimated to date from about 300 to 200 BC. This book is the first, and at the same time, the most well-known of the 3 books of Enoch. It's a religious text that tells the story of Noah's great-grandfather, who was called Enoch. Yes, exactly, the Noah whom you all know from the Bible, the man who, together with his family, survived the great flood that wiped out humanity and all life on earth. Now you may ask, if this story is about Noah's great-grandfather, why isn't it found in the Bible, chronologically placed in Genesis before Noah's story? The answer to this question is as simple as it is fascinating. The main part of the Book of Enoch was written in Ethiopian language. Whereas Enoch's story has been canonized in Ethiopia for thousands of years already, it wasn't until about 80 years ago, when the Dead Sea Scrolls containing the manuscripts of Enoch were rediscovered in the Qumran Desert in Aramaic language, that the text gained new momentum and piqued worldwide interest. However, although the text was subsequently recognized as an Abrahamic religious scripture, it was not included in the Bible. That's why it is referred to as apocryphal. Even though we know that the manuscript was first penned before the birth of Jesus Christ, and most of its parts were found in Ethiopia, the original author of the Book of Enoch remains unknown to us. However, as with the other books and texts of the Old Testament and the Flood, it can be assumed that these are stories that have been passed down from generation to generation for hundreds or even thousands of years before they were written down. The Book of Enoch might be a replication of an ancient manuscript, yet to be unearthed, potentially penned in the Sumerian language, but this remains purely speculative. The narrative itself delves into a time before even Jesus Christ's lifetime, reaching back to the era of the Old Testament. It takes place during the days of the biblical patriarchs and the ancient flood, possibly occurring millennia preceding Christ's birth. But let's recall the original question of why the Book of Enoch was not included in the Bible. Well, certainly not because it lacks vividness or godliness, nor because there's a shortage of references to Enoch's existence in the Bible, as there are plenty.
And he was moreover with the angels of God these 6 jubilees of years, and they showed him everything which is on earth and in the heavens, the rule of the sun, and he wrote down everything.
This is just one striking example of many. Enoch is even mentioned in Genesis as Noah's great-grandfather. So the reason why the Book of Enoch was not included in the Bible must be another. A new theory could explain why stories like that of Enoch are excluded from the Bible. This theory, supported by a growing number of religious and linguistic experts worldwide, states that there is a hidden layer of narrative in ancient religious texts. Paintings, scriptures, and figurines all tell us of highly worshipped gods. But what if these so-called holy gods were actually highly advanced beings? Let's embark on a detailed analysis of the intriguing ancient text excerpt that recounts Enoch's ascent to the heavens. The translations utilized for analysis in this video have been sourced from professional linguists and religious scholars, each of whom has incorporated multiple versions of the Book of Enoch in their translations. We start our analysis with the onset of Enoch's enigmatic ascension to heaven. In addition to the translation you heard at the beginning, let's examine a second translation by a linguistic expert in the classical Ethiopic language, also known as Ge'ez, in which the book was written. This translation particularly emphasizes the darkness of the clouds emerging from the unknown hovering vehicle above Enoch.
I beheld dark clouds, through which I perceived a calling for myself from the clouds, which then summoned a track for me leading to the stars and bright lights, where they quickly moved me along.
Both translations we looked at mention stars and bright lights that Enoch observes above him as he ascends into heaven. Considering the fact that he describes these stars the very moment he is elevated into heaven, and the actual stars would be too distant to perceive at that point, it's unlikely that Enoch is referring to literal stars here. Instead, he may be describing the lights emanating from the technical aircraft hovering above him. This interpretation would also justify Enoch's use of both stars and bright lights. He likely senses they aren't real stars, but lacks the precise vocabulary to describe the points of light above him in a more accurate way. Indeed, Enoch's account of being lifted into the heavens closely resembles the stereotypical UFO abduction that science fiction has embedded in our cultural memory. A UFO pulls a person up with a beam, typically depicted as a glowing mist. Enoch also uses these exact words to describe his ascent into the sky. A track surrounded by mist that seems to have appeared just for him, almost as if the misty beam is calling him. Furthermore, the ominous presence of the dark clouds from which the call seems to emanate catches our attention. Why would the author specifically mention here that these were dark clouds? We would typically associate a divine vision with bright, white, heavenly, majestic clouds, wouldn't we? The idea that Enoch might have witnessed a thunderstorm at the exact moment of a divine vision also seems implausible. Did God simply want to scare him? None of these explanations seems truly convincing to me. However, there is another alternative interpretation, supporting the theory that Enoch might in fact be talking of a very real journey to the heavens. One could argue that Enoch is possibly trying to describe artificially generated exhaust clouds as typically produced by a rocket or spacecraft during liftoff. This would help explain what Enoch later labels as tongues of fire. The dark clouds, combined with the tongues of fire, conceivably conjure the image of the launch of a chemically fueled rocket, for these are precisely the primary elements one would expect to see in such a scenario. But hold on a moment, you might object. Isn't that stretching it a bit? Maybe Enoch just had a headache before his vision, like when your head hurts and feels clouded, and, as often happens with migraine attacks, he might have seen flashes of light. Fair point, one must admit. However, it's worth noting that similar scenes are described in many parts of the Bible when prophets encounter God, together with many other people, suggesting they are not merely individual visions. Take, for instance, a passage from Exodus, where God descends upon Mount Sinai. Let's hear Moses explaining to us what he witnessed.
On the third day, at daybreak, there were loud claps of thunder, flashes of lightning, a thick cloud covering the mountain, and an ear-piercing trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp shuddered in fear. Moses led the people out of the camp to meet God. They stood at attention at the base of the mountain. Mount Sinai was all smoke because God had come down on it as fire. Smoke poured from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain shuddered and heaved. The trumpet blasts grew louder and louder.
Throughout the Old Testament and in the Apocrypha, there are several passages that recount such events. One, in particular, is also worth mentioning here. It is telling the story of how the prophet Elijah was lifted into heaven by a so-called whirlwind.
There appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven.
Such biblical passages undoubtedly prompt reflection from today's perspective. How is it that ancient religious texts repeatedly depict God's arrival on earth in such vivid and, by today's standards, technologically suggestive language? Returning to the Book of Enoch may offer further insights into our inquiries, even though it's now apparent that the description of his ascension to heaven can be interpreted in a second, highly intriguing and novel manner. One must still argue, doesn't the manuscript clearly state that it's merely a vision? Let's delve deeper into the possible meanings of this word. Numerous biblical figures from the Old Testament, including Abraham, Elijah, John, Ezekiel, and Moses, share vividly described encounters with God. These encounters often depict God descending from heaven or ascending to heaven. Although these reports can be intriguingly viewed through the lens of technology, we need to ask ourselves whether they actually describe real experiences. Common in their remarkable accounts is the following. When a prophet is taken up to heaven or encounters a celestial vehicle, it is always described as them having a vision, just like with Enoch. But are there maybe other ways to interpret the term that is commonly translated as vision in these scenarios? The answer is yes. In Ge'ez, the original Ethiopian language of the Book of Enoch, to have a vision also means to see, observe, have a look at, watch, take notice of, perceive or explore. In addition, what's translated as vision can also mean view, look, glance, gaze, sight or appearance. It could actually mean that Enoch and the other prophets are merely describing what they see, essentially providing an eyewitness report of their subjective visual impressions. They probably want to tell us, look, this is what I saw with my own eyes. In a way, This could make them the first journalists in human history. Vision, as we use it today, implying some sort of psychedelic experience, mistakenly conveys the idea that these experiences were not real, but the term was probably translated incorrectly, as has happened on numerous occasions in the history of ancient religious manuscripts. To shed light on the above possibility, we need to understand how mistranslations can occur in biblical or religious texts. Simply put, what the prophets saw and described doesn't align with our common religious beliefs. The dogmas of the Christian Church clearly state that humans only ascend to heaven in the form of souls after death, where the highest judgment is then passed upon them. During the Middle Ages, this dogma became firmly entrenched, and it had a singular purpose. The Church propagated the notion that souls journeyed to heaven or hell only after death. This belief provided a lucrative revenue stream through the sale of indulgences, exploiting people's fears of damnation and offering salvation from the eternal torments of hell in exchange for payment. So Enoch's journey to the heavens while he was still alive went counter to their dogmatic narrative. How would a celestial vehicle, capable of transporting living humans to and from heaven during their lifetimes, fit into this belief? It wouldn't. Hence, the translators were forced to interpret these experiences as mere visions. Enoch tells us how he is drawn in, before finding himself facing what is described as a wall. This wall appears to be a part of a vast building, which Enoch calls a house. Enoch emphasizes how literally everything about the strange house, including the outer walls, the floor, the foundation, and the entrance, seems to be made of crystal. The word crystal appears 4 times alone in this short passage. How do we make sense of that? Is this redundancy merely due to the limited vocabulary of primitive mankind? As you may have already guessed, the answer to that is not necessarily. Once again, we must let go of our own biases and stereotypes and stop considering our superstitious ancestors as limited and primitive. We will only truly appreciate the profound layers of meaning of these oldest stories of humanity when we stop labeling their texts as mere fantasies. Let's ask ourselves, why might Enoch mention the crystal-like appearance of the house he finds himself in so many times? Firstly, let's take a closer look at the term crystal. In the ancient Ethiopian language, in which most parts of the Book of Enoch were passed down, also known as Gez, the term for crystal has a second meaning: snow, frost, hoarfrost, ice or hail. Now consider this. If you were a person living thousands of years ago in a primitive settlement culture, how would you describe an advanced, high-tech metal? A smooth, shiny material. It's bright, gleaming, dazzling. The exotic walls seem hard and cold, glistening in the light. It depicts vast, elongated, solid and polished surfaces. What if your vocabulary were confined to that of a primitive Stone Age settler? How would you describe these alien, gleaming surfaces? Perhaps as a surface of glazing, reflecting ice, or sparkling, shining crystal. And how would you characterize a large alien structure with entrance? You might label it simply as a house, given your familiarity with your own dwelling. And yet, this house stands apart from any dwelling you've ever encountered in your life. The repetitive use of the word crystal or ice, therefore, might not stem from Enoch's limited narrative ability, but simply from his overwhelming fascination with the uniformly shining outer walls of the unknown object in front of him. Next, Enoch stands at the edge of the entrance portal, his eyes fixed on the alien crystal house before him. Its walls blaze with swirling flames.
Its ceiling was like the path of the stars and the lightnings, and between them were fiery cherubim, and their heaven was as clear as water. A flaming fire surrounded the walls, and its portals blazed with fire.
Yet the flames seemed to burn without consuming the crystalline surface. How can the icy or metallic walls be burning at the same time? To grasp the hidden meaning of Enoch's words, we will once again refer to a second translation, which states, "The burning wall encircles a hot point that consumes by fire." Could Enoch here be attempting, once again, to describe an unknown technology? The structure, likely an alien metallic structure, revolves around a hot point. A familiar concept today is that of a spaceship that generates a gravity field through means of rotating around its axis. The hot point, perceived as burning or fiery in the middle, could be responsible for the rotating movement of the ship, and at the same time reflecting the metallic outer walls, providing an explanation for why Enoch describes them as both ice and fire. Even without assuming a fiery central object around which the potential spaceship is rotating, light reflections on the crystalline metallic exterior walls could explain Enoch's impressions of fire. Of course, this idea remains purely speculative. Nevertheless, it is both exciting and important to consider various interpretations of this scene. One thing seems quite clear. It is unlikely that Enoch has seen actual fire. This would imply that heavenly angels literally descended to him in a burning house. Why would the angels set their own heavenly residence on fire? Were they just trying to frighten Enoch? And how could Enoch, a human, survive in a burning house long enough to make a heavenly journey and return healthy again? You see, there are only two possibilities. Either we almost compelled to consider the term fire as purely symbolic language. But this explanation is not very convincing. Or, the second way is that we see a hidden level of meaning in the terms that our ancestors used to try to describe the incomprehensible with their primitive vocabulary. In this video, we explored a brief excerpt from the Book of Enoch. Even those few lines sparked numerous questions and suggested a fascinating, revolutionary approach to interpretation. We may never uncover what our ancestors truly witnessed and experienced. The extent to which these accounts are fictional or factual, and whether they involve advanced technologies and beings, remains uncertain. However, one thing is clear. We should take these echoes of our distant ancestors very seriously. We should read, study, analyze, and discuss them. After all, these texts represent our only window into our past and ancestry, and they may narrate a version of humanity's origins markedly different from traditional religious interpretations. A new interpretation emerges, one that we can arrive at only through our current understanding of space travel and technology, whereas religious scholars of the past, with the knowledge they had at that time, could not open the door to a true understanding of the sacred narratives. Only with today's technological advancements, we can remove the layers of delusive dust from these ancient stories to uncover their true, long-forgotten meanings. What are your thoughts on Enoch's ascension to heaven? Feel free to share them in the comments. If you like this in-depth analysis of an ancient manuscript through the lens of modern technology, please consider subscribing to the channel. In our next video, we'll delve into Enoch's experience upon entering the alleged spacecraft. Stay tuned for the next episode.